you've mentioned how the gold nuggets change their patterns in different points in the riverway.
Yes. Yes.
If we can just sort of touch on that a little bit. To start with, can you just sort of describe the environment that the gold nuggets are found in?
Sure. I think we have to imagine the gold nugget a bit like a cow, or maybe a kangaroo to be a bit closer to your region. So you have to imagine it as a herbivore that lives in very shallow water, and its sole interest is algae. So from the small size up to the adult size of 35 centimeters or so, that fish is always going to be in water that is generally less than 2 meters deep, because that's where the most algae grows. And it's just feeding on, algae and the biocover and the animals associated with the biocover. I don't want to just say algae, because we're talking, bacteria, and we're talking about microinvertebrates that are living in there. But if you're in a strong current area in the Xingu, the first fish you'll see is a gold nugget, and it's just grazing quite often on the bedrock, because the Xingu is a shallow river with high currents, so there's a lot of exposed bedrock, and that's, if you have clear water and exposed bedrock, you get nice algae growth on it. So that's where you would see your gold nuggets. Where you wouldn't see them is on sand. So if you imagine a typical river where you have a gradient, there's a rapid, and then there's a pool behind the rapid, and then there's an area where sand has collected, and then the elevation drops and you get another rapid, and then you get this pattern of rapid pool, sandy flat, rapid pool, sandy flat kind of thing all the way down. So every time you get these spaces in between, the gold nuggets are not great at transversing those areas. So eventually the populations become isolated. And then if you look at the bottom of the Xingu, which is the northernmost point, because the Xingu flows north, the northernmost point where the Xingu drops into the Amazon lowland, there's a gigantic rapid, and the gold nuggets there have no spots at all.
Wow.
And then you go up a little bit and some small yellow spots start to occur, and then the spots get a little bit bigger around Altamira, where most of our gold nuggets come from. And then as you go up to the confluence where the Iriri and the Xingu meet, the two principal tributaries, that's where the spots are the largest, and the yellow margin is a little bit broader. But it's all the same species. And if you were to look at every little rapid in between these major populations, you would probably find every intergrade between them. It's the same in the Congo, except maybe there, because of the depth of the water, these separations start to occur long enough that new species start to occur. But the Xingu is so shallow that I don't think that there's still a flow of gold nuggets between one population or another. So, I don't think they would ever, it would take millions of years, and they probably wouldn't become separate species.
Why do you think they've dropped the patterning from different points?
That would be just a pure guess on my side, is that the confluence with the Iriri is extremely clear water. And there's the Xingu substrates are mostly, these bedrocks are granites and gneiss, so they are kind of patterned, speckled, dark or reddish black little patterns. But then you get these marbles of silica. They look totally ridiculous. If I look at this, that's what they look like underwater, except they're yellow because of the iron staining them. So these bright yellow little marbles of silica, they come in all different sizes. And then in between them are these laterite pellets, these iron ore pellets that are red. And then some of these are covered in a material called geothite, where bacteria actually absorb metals and kind of deposit them on the outside of the pebbles. So they're like marbles, but the outside is like black, shiny metal. They look spectacular, but if you hit it with a harder rock, it'll just split open and reveal a sandstone inside with a thin layer of this black metal stuff. So you get this crazy pattern of, the reddish substrate, and then red little pebbles, and then yellow bright little pebbles, and black little pebbles. And then if you look at the Gold Nugget Plecos, that's a pretty good camouflage for that. But as you go downriver, the water is a little bit less clear, and that last population is in the Amazon lowland, where you can actually feel the tides of the Atlantic. So all the way up the Amazon, you can see a tide of 60, 70 centimeters, and the water isn't that clear anymore. So maybe there wouldn't be as much benefit in having this crazy pattern, because these three-colored substrate pebbles no longer exist there. So that's just my theory of why they could be so different between upstream and downstream.
Is the feeding, what they're consuming, still very, very similar between the points in the stream, or so that doesn't
think so. I think so. I think the bio cover that is growing on the rocks is probably more or less the same. It's just that as the water is clearer, it might contain more algae, or it might occur to a deeper zone than in the lower part of the river. So if we go back to this place at the bottom near Victoria do Xingu, where the Xingu is now forming a ria, so a very broad channel that you guys would call a fjord, I guess. So once the Xingu enters the ria, which is this very broad channel with a sandy bottom, in this channel there are these islands that are that consist of large boulders. So the boulders are the size of trucks and small Volkswagen Beetles, and they're just kind of piled up as like an island that consists of a bunch of boulders stacked on top of each other. So the Gold Nugget Plecos, that aren't gold nuggets anymore, the green nuggets, are basically sitting on top of these boulders, and they're just grazing on algae, biocover, a bunch of silt that has been deposited. There are still zebra plecos in this zone also, like below the last rapid in the Amazon, technically the Amazon lowland.
Oh, fascinating. Is it, because I've always envisioned like lots of piles of wood, but you're describing a lot more of a rocky type territory. Wow, that is yeah.
There's no wood to speak of in the Xingu. I mean, you'll get the occasional root from a tree that is growing on the edge, and you will get in the ria, because the slope of that ria is a little bit steep, so trees sometimes fall down and slide down the slope, but the Xingu doesn't really have any wood in it at all.
That is, that's incredibly fascinating. Like I said, I always thought it was very wood dense.
Yeah, not at all.
Cool. Do you notice any different behaviors between the nugget plecos from the top and the bottom of the riverways, or is it all very similar?
Yeah, I think it's very similar. I mean, the problem is fish like this are a true challenge because they need the high current, which means they need a lot more food to balance out their energy. So if you keep them in the current that they like and the temperature that they like, the Xingu is 30 degrees. So if you have high current and 30 degrees, you need to power so much food into your fish. If you and I exercised every day, and ate the same amount, we wouldn't look like this.
Yeah. Wow. Cool.
So if you want to keep zebra plecos, and if you want to keep especially things like gold nugget that live in the really high current, the zebras don't, but the gold nuggets do. So if you want to keep them like really properly with the right amount of current at the right temperature, the food becomes a real issue because it's very hard to feed the fish, enough to sustain the amount of energy that would be required in that kind of environment. And I think that's also why so many people have trouble keeping the fish alive. It's just not meant to be the algae eater in a community tank. It's just not the right fish for that.
Yeah, for sure. Have you noticed any changes in the population between sort of up and lower in the waterways, or are they all pretty stable and pretty similar?
No, I mean it's changing for the worse because of the dam. So the dam is at Altamira. It's before the Volta Grande, the big curve of the Xingu, and it's essentially removed the most important, the most dynamic thing in the Xingu, which is the flood pulse of the rainy season that triggers all the fish to breed. But if you put a dam, then you don't get the flood pulse of all this water coming through and flood events and so on. So that would be the equivalent of removing maybe a Canadian winter where the water never reaches 4 degrees under the ice. Probably most northern fish species would stop breeding, because without that diapause of 3 months of 4 degrees centigrade and a foot of ice on top, if you remove that, you're probably removing the main trigger for the fish to breed. Also, of course, the upstream of the dam, you'll get a gigantic reservoir, 80 kilometers long, in which there are no more rapids because the water level is permanently high. And then below that, you're creating a permanent dry season. And, add to that all the silt that is caused by all the dead material in the inside the dam's reservoir. It's not good for these fish. Some fish will benefit, but most don't.
Wow, cool.
Other fish will colonize that habitat. The Xingu fish will disappear. The rheophile fish will disappear, and Amazon lowland species can now, through the fish ladders, enter that area, and they will just colonize it. But it's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, you're absolutely blowing my mind in the last few minutes, so I just need to compose my thoughts a little bit with this. This is, yeah.
I mean, this is not just happening in the Xingu; it's happening in almost every major river in the world, right? So
yeah. If someone was wanting to try and recreate the Xingu to do a biotope for nuggets, how would you suggest they do that?
Well, first of all, you have to remember these fish get big. We are talking 30 centimeters. 25, 30 centimeters is probably a good size, even though they can get bigger. So you would need a very large aquarium. You would need a lot of current. From my side in Canada, I would insulate 5 sides of it, because in our problem is usually our houses are too hot in the winter and just too cold in the summer. Because Montreal, we get temperatures around 35 degrees on a regular basis now. So, it's not like, for me to keep rainbow fish, for example, it's not that easy because my fish room doesn't have air conditioning. So I run my well water with 12 degrees into the tanks, but it's not an ideal situation. So you would have to, number one, you need a lot of heating. Number two, you need a lot of current. And number three, you have to figure out, what are you going to feed so that you get enough nutrition into your gold nuggets for them to thrive? And that's not that easy. As you know, not a lot of people have bred gold nuggets in captivity. And, that diet issue has a lot to do with it. If you think about 6 plecos that are 30 centimeters long, that are in hot, fast-moving water, we're talking a lot of food that has to go in that tank every day. So, if you're not changing water, once a week, like 75%, you're probably not going to do well with that situation. So, I would strongly advise against that particular fish, because I think it's one of the most difficult of all the plecos, if you want to do it right. That's not to say that there aren't people that have a Malawi tank with a gold nugget as an algae eater that's been living in there for 10 years.
Yeah, we've all seen that. Yeah,
I've seen a guy breed zebra pleco in his Malawi community tank. So,
no way.
Yeah,
Wow.
I guess fish are pretty adaptable, but if you want to breed a pleco, it's probably not the fish to start with.
Yeah, cool. We've had a couple of comments from the floor. I'll just bring this one up from Brian quickly. He said, it's like evolution on speed. When new species enter a different ecosystem, Oliver is making me do thinking about this rather than my work I need to be doing. Work's overrated, buddy.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, the colonizers are never good, right? Because the fish that colonize are the generalists that would do best in this sort of new environment. And in the Xingu, there are already some Acanthicus adonis, Malaeus or Meloplus schomburgki. Of course, Meloplus schomburgki doesn't sound threatening, but if you have 5 highly adapted rheophile pacus that are living in the Xingu Rapids, and there are no more Xingu Rapids, they're just going to get outcompeted and outbred by the Amazon lowland species that are perfectly comfortable, breeding and living in a lake year round. But fish like Osuctus xinguensis are, extremely threatened because it only lives in the impact zone of the dam. There are other fish that there are some Xingu endemics that are really only living in the area that's impacted by the dam, and for a lot of them, it's probably not good.
Cool. Right. So I'm just going to try and bring up these questions in a logical order. Rebecca has said maybe that explains why the Barian Sisters territorially, if this space is so limited, and she's heard that the bee, you can try and pronounce it because I'm not going to come from soup green water, but she's got no idea about the other word Avo.
Yeah, so Barian Sister Gentellus, the Gold Nugget Pleco, likes these areas where there's exposed bedrock and super fast flowing water right in the rapids. Behind the rapids, where you start to get, normally you get a pool and then you get the edge with some rocky outcroppings and stuff. Those are the areas where you find zebra plecos, and that's where you find Chrysolomus, the L47. So that species, unlike the Gold Nugget Pleco, is more of a slower moving water fish. It's, I think, a lot easier to keep for that very reason. And its habitats are between these giant boulders. You get horizontal cracks, and you find the L47 in these habitats. They're not sitting in the shallow water in the middle of the rapid. So, they're both Barian sisters, but they're very different from each other.
Cool. I was going to touch on that.
You get the same pair in the Orinoco. If we look at Barian Sisters demantoides, L200 would be the one that's living in the very high flow in the rapids of the Orinoco. And then L239, so Barian Sisters bigini, the blue panac, as often gets called, would be the slower moving behind the rapids fish. So just because something is a Barian Sisters, it's not obligate to live in the highest flow at all times. Not all species do.
What a fascinating group of fish.
Yeah.
Rebecca would also like to know, Barian Sisters potentially threatened. She's seen some photos before and after of the Xingu Dam causing massive silt buildup.
Well, I think that if you look at the Gold Nugget distribution, so it's found from the RIA at the northernmost point, so the downstreammost point would be Vitória do Xingu. And this is a good one for the football fans. Vitória do Xingu got a lot of the money from the dam, even though the dam isn't that close to it. And the mayor thought the best way to invest it would be to build a giant soccer stadium for a town of like 6,000 people and invite Zico, who is one of the World Cup champions of the 1970s, to play with his friends in front of the village. So if you look at this point, this is the northernmost distribution point. So it would be one extreme. The other extreme would be, the northern extreme would be in the Iriri, where the Kurua waterfall is. That waterfall is just too tall, so the gold nuggets wouldn't be able to go above it. And on the Xingu itself, it goes all the way into the headwaters. So it lives, probably more than half of its range would be outside the impact zone of the dam. Now, those other zones are threatened by deforestation, gold mining, industrial agriculture, pollution. It's probably not a threatened species because of its large distribution, at least not immediately. the Xingu itself is just being attacked from all sides. The dam is the greatest problem, but there are problems on all sides.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Catfish Den has said it seems that most of the loricates that have been deemed impossible to breed in the hobby have come from very similar fast-flowing environments. Feel that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's the problem is not recreating a fast-flowing environment. We can do that relatively easily. The problem is getting enough calories into the fish once you're keeping them the way that they should be kept. And in the case of cichlids, a lot of those rheophile fish are much more aggressive because in a rapid there's less space, so the fish compensate by being more aggressive towards each other, and that's a problem also. But the diet and getting enough food into them is probably the key.
So just as we're on the topic of the gold nuggets, they're very incestuous, and food, what would you encourage people keeping them to be feeding them, and how often would you be encouraging them to be fed?
I think that's a question for somebody that breeds plecos on a regular basis to see what they're doing, to see what works. My guess would be probably the best thing would be something like repashi, something that's a paste that you can put onto a floor tile, like a terracotta tile, let it dry there, and then you put that floor tile into the tank in an area behind a big rock where there's a little bit less current and the fish can feed on it all day. And if that's, high protein enough with a lot of spirulina, that would probably be the key. But I'm by no means the best fish breeder, certainly not for plecos.